Macmillan Audio presents The Absolution by Yrsa Sigurdardottir. Read for you by Lucy Paterson.
Chapter 1. The women's toilets on the lower ground floor were deserted. The sinks were dry, and the doors of the empty cubicles stood open a crack. The place was in the sort of state you'd expect after all the queues earlier that evening. Bins overflowing with used paper towels, empty Coke cups littering every surface, the contents of a large box of popcorn strewn over the floor and trampled by the women hopping desperately from one foot to the other in the queue. Stella assumed the same chaos must reign in the gents and felt thankful that it wasn't her job to clean them. The mess was unusually bad as 2 films had sold out and the others had attracted pretty big audiences as well. There had been such a crush at the kiosk in the foyer before the films began and during the intervals that the popcorn machine hadn't been able to keep up, even though they'd made loads in advance, and the Diet Coke had run out, much to the disgust of the customers. Stella had had to bite her lip to stop herself answering back when they blamed her, like it was her job to buy the stuff in or keep track of stocks. She paused in the doorway, suddenly conscious of being alone down there, the only person in the entire building. The silence was absolute. No muffled booming from the auditoriums, no chattering voices of the girls she worked with. She had offered to close up as usual so they could catch their bus, and stood watching through the glass wall of the foyer as they vanished into the snowstorm. No sooner had their shapes receded into the thick veil of white than she had begun to regret her generous offer. Not that her motives had been purely unselfish. In reality, she hadn't been able to resist showing off that she'd got a boyfriend with a car. No messing about on buses for her. For some reason, her thoughts suddenly returned to the snap she'd received just after the last interval. She hadn't a clue who the sender was. It wasn't anyone she'd added. Of course, she should have changed her settings ages ago and blocked strangers from messaging her, especially now that old people had started using the app. Not content with ruining Facebook, they were taking over Snapchat as well. She bet it was some old bag, maybe one of her mum's friends or a relative she'd forgotten about. The username didn't ring any bells. Just 13. Maybe it wasn't some old person after all. Maybe it was a kid who'd just turned 13. That would explain the weird message. The snap had been a photo of her in the act of serving popcorn to a customer. It wasn't a flattering picture. She was making a face, and her body, the little that could be seen of it, was caught at a stupid angle. No pose, no smile. The caption had been as puzzling as the snap itself. All it said was, "See you." Whoever the sender was, they'd obviously been at the cinema but hadn't come over to say hello. Maybe it was some shy little boy who didn't have the guts to talk to her. Well, it was lucky for him because she'd have told him where to go. She had zero interest in meeting creeps, and only a creep would send a snap like that uninvited. The door swung to behind Stella. The hydraulics were broken, so it closed slowly at first before suddenly gathering speed and slamming shut with a loud bang. The noise reverberated around the tiled space, echoing in her head, drawing attention to the silence. She'd been feeling a bit uneasy upstairs, but it was a lot worse down here on the lower level. At least in the foyer, you could see out of the windows or as far as the thickly falling snow would allow. It must have been the weather that had driven people to the cinema in hordes. Stella had seen all the films that were showing, so she knew they sucked. Still, while you were watching them, you could forget the Arctic conditions outside.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?